Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear is something few ever dare to talk about. This is a story of America's most feared fortress, a place where men vanish into silence. Welcome to ADX Florence, where no one can escape. It started on a gray morning in the high desert of Colorado. The sun hadn't yet burned through the frost, and the wind carried that dry, metallic smell of stone and steel. Beyond the snow-tipped mountains, buried in the heart of Fremont County, sits a facility so secure that even its shadows are watched. The United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility. Locals call it ADX Florence. To most, it's just a name whispered in documentaries. But to the people who work behind its reinforced walls, ADX is something else, a living thing, breathing control and isolation. They say once you go in, the world forgets you exist. That morning, Warden Daniel Cross walked to the compound's inner corridor, a 12-foot hallway of concrete and echoing footsteps. He'd been in charge for 8 years, and he carried the weight of a place designed for ghosts. Murderers, terrorists, cartel bosses, all housed under one philosophy: complete control through complete isolation. But on that day, something had gone wrong. A guard named Officer Ramirez hadn't reported for duty. His shift had begun at 0600. His car was still in the lot. His radio, found near the inner security gate, in a place where nothing ever slipped past surveillance. His disappearance was impossible. And that was exactly the problem. By noon, the prison went into code black, total lockdown. Every cell sealed, every corridor cleared. From his office, Cross watched the feeds flicker across the monitors, for 190 cameras capturing every angle of silence. But camera 47A, the one watching Tier 5 of Cell Block Echo, had frozen at 5:47 a.m. The timestamp matched Ramirez's last check-in. On the screen, the image showed a dim corridor lined with reinforced cell doors. The feed was grainy, but you could see a faint outline of something near the floor, like a shadow stretching across the concrete. Cross leaned in, adjusting the zoom. The shadow wasn't still. It moved, twisting slightly as if something was dragged out of frame. The FBI was called by nightfall. Agent Rebecca Hensley arrived before dawn the next day, her coat whipping in the desert wind. She'd been investigating federal correctional breaches for a decade, but this one was different. ADX wasn't just any prison. It was supposed to be impenetrable. As she walked to the compound, she noticed something strange. The prison smelled faintly of oil, like something mechanical had been tampered with. The warden explained that maintenance crews hadn't been in the block for 2 weeks. When she reached Cell Block Echo, the air felt heavier. Each cell was sealed with a steel door, layered in titanium mesh. Prisoners communicated only by reflection, glimpses of eyes in the slit-sized window. The silence was suffocating. Inside one of those cells was Marcus Dwyer, an inmate serving life without parole for orchestrating a string of bank robberies that left 3 federal agents dead. Dwyer was intelligent, manipulative, and rumored to have ties to multiple escape attempts across the country before he was finally sent to ADX. When Hensley asked to speak with him, the warden hesitated. "Dwyer doesn't talk," he said. "He hasn't said a word in 3 years." But as the small viewing panel slid open, Marcus Dwyer looked up from the shadows. His eyes were calm, almost amused. "You're looking for Ramirez," he said quietly. "A shame. He thought he could make it." Agent Hensley froze. "What do you mean, make it?" Dwyer's mouth curved into a small grin. "Out!" He turned away before she could ask more. The guards pulled her back as the cell doors sealed with a thunderous click. Back in the control room, Hensley reviewed the maintenance logs. One stood out, a service report from a week earlier, authorized under a false name. It allowed a contractor temporary access to Cell Block Echo's ventilation tunnels. The signature matched none of the registered staff. The warden swore he hadn't approved it. The system, he said, couldn't be hacked from the inside. But the logs told a different story. Whoever created that authorization had high-level clearance. Someone inside the administration. As the investigation deepened, one thing became clear. Officer Ramirez hadn't just disappeared. Someone had helped him. That night, during a second review of camera 47A, the technicians noticed a faint reflection in the corridor's far end, a distorted image of a man in a dark uniform, standing by the air vent. It wasn't Ramirez. The timestamp was 10 minutes after his last check-in. "Zoom in," Hensley said. The image was blurry, but the badge on his chest was visible. It bore the emblem of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and the name tag, though pixelated, began with a C. Her heart sank. Warden Cross. But before she could confront him, alarms erupted through the facility. A door sensor on Tier 5 had triggered. Guards flooded the corridor. On screen, they saw what looked like a cell door slightly ajar, something that should have been impossible. They reached the door within seconds. It was Dwyer's. The cell was empty. The bed was cold. The restraints cut clean through. On the wall, scratched into the concrete with something sharp, was a single sentence. "He made it." The warden arrived moments later, visibly shaken. "That's impossible," he muttered. "There's no way anyone can get out of here. Every exit, every vent, every tunnel." But before he finished, one of the guards shouted from the corner. Beneath the grated floor vent lay a small piece of cloth, a torn strip from a correctional officer's uniform. It was marked with Ramirez's name tag, and on the inside of the fabric, barely visible under the dust, was written in black ink, "Check below the yard." Agent Hensley's blood ran cold. Beneath the yard lay the foundation tunnels, sealed decades ago during the prison's construction. No one was supposed to know they existed. The only people who'd ever seen the blueprints were the original engineers and the warden himself. She turned toward Cross, but his expression had already changed. The confusion in his eyes had given way to something else. Calm, deliberate awareness. "Agent Hensley," he said softly, "you don't understand this place. It was never meant to keep them in." Her heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" He looked past her, to the flickering monitors that showed the endless corridors of concrete and steel. It was built to bury the truth. And then the power went out. The screens went black. Somewhere in the dark, a door hissed open. When the lights went out, the silence hit harder than the darkness. Alarms should have sounded instantly. Backup generators were supposed to engage in less than 5 seconds. But for nearly 2 minutes, there was nothing. Just the echo of boots scraping on concrete and the sharp, panicked breaths of guards who had never seen the prison powerless before. Agent Rebecca Hensley drew her flashlight, its thin beam cutting to the black like a blade. Beside her, Warden Cross stood motionless, his face half-shadowed, unreadable. "Get emergency power online," someone shouted to the intercom, but the line was dead, the comms too. The entire facility had gone silent. And then, slowly, the hum returned, a low, mechanical growl from somewhere deep beneath them. The lights flickered back to life in sections, one corridor at a time. When the main feed returned on the monitors, the yard cameras showed something no one expected. A square section of ground, right in the middle of the open yard, was slightly raised, like a hatch had been forced open from below. They reached the yard within minutes. The snow was disturbed in a perfect circle, dusted over fresh dirt. At the center lay a rusted metal plate half lifted, with a decades-old warning labeled barely legible through corrosion. "Subterranean access, authorized personnel only." Cross stared at it. Pale. "That shouldn't even exist," he said. Those tunnels were sealed during construction, filled with concrete. Hensley crouched by the hatch. Her glove brushed against a small trail of boot prints, faint but recent, leading away from the opening. Someone had been down there. Someone had come out. A squad of 6 correctional officers formed a perimeter, while Hensley and 2 others pried open the hatch. The hinges shrieked in protest, exposing a narrow shaft descending into the dark. The air rising from below was stale and damp, like the breath of something that had been buried for a very long time. Cross hesitated. "You can't go down there without authorization. It's off-record infrastructure." "Then consider this an emergency," Hensley replied, stepping onto the ladder. "We're finding out what's under your prison." The beam of her flashlight disappeared into black as she descended. 20 feet down, her boots hit concrete. The tunnel stretched ahead, narrow and curved, lined with old maintenance cables and rusted pipes. Dust covered the floor, except for a trail of fresh footprints. Someone had come through recently, and not just one person. The further she went, the colder it became. Moisture dripped from the ceiling, echoing like a ticking clock. The trail of footprints led to a heavy metal door marked Section C. C! The same letter she'd seen on the badge from the frozen camera footage. She tried the handle. It was locked, but someone had carved a symbol into the metal, a crude triangle with a slash through it. Dwyer's mark. She'd seen it before in case files about his old crew. She turned to one of the guards. "Get this open." When the door creaked free, a smell hit them like rot and rust. Behind it lay a wide chamber, old, unfinished, and filled with debris from decades past. But at the center of the room was something that froze her blood. A makeshift workspace. Tables lined with tools, wires, and blueprints. The original prison schematics. And spread across the table was a series of printed photos, surveillance stills of guards, routes, and cell layouts. Someone had been planning from the inside for years. Among the files was one marked Phase 4. Inside, typed on yellow paper, were 4 words that made her chest tighten. "The warden will lead." Cross's flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. "This is decades old," he muttered. "Some contractor." "Save it." Hensley cut in. "This isn't a contractor's plan. It's a blueprint for infiltration. Someone built a prison inside a prison." She traced a line on one of the blueprints, a network of tunnels branching beneath multiple wings of ADX Florence. At the far end, one path was circled in red ink, with a single word next to it: "Out." Just then, one of the guards found something else in the corner, a torn section of uniform fabric, stuck under a pipe. Ramirez's tag again, but this one had blood on it. Next to it, scrawled in chalk, was another message: "He's not who you think." Hensley looked toward Cross. His face was blank, but his jaw was tight. "You said Ramirez was missing since yesterday," she said slowly, "but this blood is fresh." Cross didn't answer. Before she could press him, a faint clanging sound echoed down the tunnel. It came from deeper inside, rhythmic and deliberate, like footsteps on metal. The guards drew their weapons. Hensley's flashlight caught a brief glint of movement, someone running between pillars at the far end. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice bouncing off the walls. "Federal agents." But the figure didn't stop. He turned his head for just a second, enough for the light to catch his face. It was Ramirez. Pale, thin, terrified. He wasn't trying to escape. He was running from something. "Help me!" he shouted. "You don't know what he's done." Before he could finish, a deafening metallic groan filled the chamber. The ground beneath them trembled. Pipes burst overhead, showering sparks and dust. And then darkness again. When the lights flickered back, Ramirez was gone. The tunnel behind him had collapsed, caved in by decades of decay or by deliberate sabotage. Hensley stumbled forward, coughing through the dust. Cross pulled her back by the shoulder, but she shoved him off. "Someone did this on purpose," she shouted. "Someone knew we'd come down here." She turned her light toward the blueprint table, but it was empty now. The papers were gone. Only a single sheet remained, fluttering against the concrete floor. It was a printout of a personnel file. Her own. A red X was drawn over her face. Back above ground, emergency crews worked to seal off the hatch. Cross ordered everyone out of the yard. His voice was sharp, commanding, but something about it had changed. There was no shock, no confusion, only control. As Hensley watched him from across the yard, she saw the faintest smear of dirt across his cuff, the same red dust that coated the tunnels below. She stepped closer. "You knew about the tunnels, didn't you?" He didn't respond, just adjusted his tie, eyes fixed on the prison walls glowing orange in the setting sun. "Agent Hensley," he said quietly, "you still think you're investigating a disappearance. You're not." "Then what am I investigating?" she asked. He turned to her, the faintest smile forming. "An exchange." That night, a storm rolled over Florence, thunder shaking the valley. As lightning flashed, Hensley stood in her temporary office, scanning the recovered files. One photograph caught her eye, a group shot of ADX's original design committee from 1992. There were engineers, security directors, and at the center, a man in uniform with a younger face, but unmistakable eyes. Daniel Cross. He wasn't just the current warden. He had been here since the beginning. And on the back of the photo, in faded ink, someone had written, "Every system needs a key." Outside in the distance, lightning illuminated the prison silhouette, a fortress built for isolation, yet hiding something that had always been connected. Deep beneath the yard, in the collapsed tunnel, something shifted. The dirt cracked open just slightly, and from below, a faint light flickered back to life. The storm outside hadn't stopped. Rain battered the steel roof of ADX Florence, a rhythm that felt like a ticking clock running out of time. Inside her temporary office, Agent Rebecca Hensley stared at the old photograph on her desk, the one showing a younger Daniel Cross standing among the original engineers of the prison. He had been there since the foundation was laid. He had watched every brick go in. And now, the man she'd been trusting to help solve a disappearance was sitting somewhere inside that same fortress, holding answers buried under 30 years of concrete. The message on the photo echoed in her mind. Every system needs a key. What did it mean? She flipped through the old blueprints again, tracing the tunnels beneath the prison. Something clicked. The layout wasn't random. The tunnels formed a grid, each labeled with sections A through E, just like the housing units above ground. But the intersection of those tunnels, right in the middle, aligned with the warden's office. Her breath caught. The system's key wasn't a mechanism. It was a man. She stormed to the corridors, lightning flashing through the narrow slit windows. Guards glanced up as she passed, uncertain, whispering. Word had spread about the tunnel collapse. Some said it wasn't an accident. Others said something else had come through that hole. When she reached the warden's office, the door was slightly open. The lights inside flickered. "Cross," she called out. No answer. On his desk sat a folder marked Phase 5. Inside, pages of personnel records, every guard, every engineer, every federal agent assigned to the facility over the past 20 years. At the top of the list, Marcus Dwyer, the escaped inmate. Next to his name, written in the margin, "Approved participant." And below it, another name newly added in pen, Rebecca Hensley. Before she could react, a voice came from the shadows. "I told you," Cross said, stepping forward. "It was never about keeping them in." She turned, gun raised. "You built this," she said. "You built the tunnels, the false logs, the whole system." He didn't flinch. "Of course I did. But you think this is about escapes? This place isn't a prison. It's a filter." "A filter?" Cross walked past her, slowly, his eyes fixed on the storm outside. The Bureau wanted control. They wanted a place where information could vanish. Witnesses, agents, even officials who knew too much. We made ADX Florence the perfect black hole. Men went in and they stopped existing. Some called it security. I called it order. You're lying. Am I? He pointed to the file. Look at Dwyer's record. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a contractor. The robberies were staged, meant to justify his transfer here. He helped build the first prototype tunnel in Section C. Ramirez found out, so I buried him. Hensley's stomach turned. You killed him? Cross shook his head slowly. No, I offered him the same thing I offered you. Before she could react, the monitor behind him came to life. The feed showed live footage from camera 47A, the same one that had frozen days ago. The corridor of cell block Echo flickered in gray light. And there, walking slowly toward the lens, was Marcus Dwyer. He wasn't escaping. He was returning. Impossible, Hensley whispered. He's supposed to be gone. Cross smiled faintly. You don't understand, Agent Hensley. He's part of the exchange. Every year, one ghost leaves this place, and one takes his place. That's how the Bureau keeps its secrets balanced. She turned toward him, eyes wide. You mean they trade lives? Not lives, he said softly. Identities. Before she could speak, the monitor cut to black. The lights dimmed again, and a low rumble vibrated through the floor. The emergency system activated, automated voice echoing through the halls. Containment breach. Section C. All units respond. Cross didn't move. He looked almost relieved. He's coming for me, he said. And when he does, You'll see how the system resets. Hensley grabbed his arm. You're coming with me. You're done running this nightmare. He turned to her, calm as ever. You can't stop it. ADX was designed to protect itself, even from the people who built it. They made it halfway through the corridor when the first explosion hit. The ground shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. Down the hall, a security door slammed shut automatically. Cross pulled his keycard, but the panel flashed red. Access revoked. Who did that? Hensley shouted. He didn't answer. The look in his eyes told her everything. Dwyer had control now. Somehow, somewhere from below, he was manipulating the systems. A second explosion echoed, closer this time. Red emergency lights flared. Over the intercom came a distorted voice, calm but chillingly familiar. You promised me freedom, Daniel, but all you built were more walls. It was Dwyer. You said this place was unbreakable. So I broke it, brick by brick. Cross froze. He's going to collapse the entire complex, he muttered. He'll kill everyone inside. Then stop him. I can't, he said, almost whispering. That's the point of the exchange. Once it begins, it has to finish. They reached the control room. Panels flickered, alarms blaring. On the main screen, the yard camera showed the ground cracking open again. The same hatch from before. Through the chaos, a figure climbed out. Marcus Dwyer. But his face was different. Leaner, older, a face that looked eerily like the warden's. He looked straight at the camera. You see it now, Agent, he said through the intercom. No one escapes ADX Florence. They just become part of it. The image glitched, flickered, and when it returned, the man on the screen wasn't Dwyer anymore. It was Cross, and standing next to Hensley in the control room was no one. The next morning, rescue teams entered the remains of the facility. The yard had collapsed inward, swallowing part of the structure. Dozens of guards were injured, some missing. They found one survivor, a woman, unconscious but alive, near the administrative wing. Her badge identified her as Rebecca Hensley, federal agent. But when she opened her eyes in the hospital days later, the doctors noticed something strange. Her voice, her tone, even her gaze, didn't match her records. She remembered the layout of the tunnels in detail, the codes for every access point. When the Bureau arrived to debrief her, she looked at them with a faint, knowing smile. Where's the warden? One agent asked. She tilted her head slightly. He's still inside, she said. We both are. Months later, ADX Florence reopened under new administration. They said it was stable again. They said the breaches were contained. But deep beneath the yard, buried under tons of concrete and steel, one light still flickered. A terminal, half broken, still online. And on its cracked screen, a single line of text blinked. Phase 6, ready? If you thought that was the end, think again, because in the world of power and prisons, nobody ever really escapes. Subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next.